The flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement weren't signaling a routine traffic stop. They were the spark that would ignite an absolute firestorm in the Fairview Police Department. A decorated patrolman thought he was asserting his dominance on a dark, empty highway. By the time daylight returned, his badge would be resting on the precinct commander's desk, his career completely pulverized. Sometimes the people you think have no power turn out to hold the keys to the entire city. The rain had been falling in a steady, icy sheet over the city of Fairview, Ohio, for hours. Talia Reed kept her hands locked at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel of her 5-year-old Honda Civic. At 24, she was in her second year at Georgetown Law, back home for the Thanksgiving holiday. She was exhausted, having just left a grueling late-night study session at a local 24-hour diner with her former high school debate partner. The streets of the South Side District were completely deserted. The rhythmic thump of her windshield wipers was the only sound keeping her company until the blinding glare of LED headlights flooded her rearview mirror. Talia checked her speedometer, 34 in a 35 zone. She hadn't swerved. Her taillights were fully functional. She signaled her lane changes. Yet the cruiser tailgated her for 4 agonizing blocks, so close she could see the distinct silhouette of the push bar on its front grille. She felt the familiar heavy knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. It was a feeling she had been taught to manage since she was 16, a survival instinct drilled into her by a man who knew the streets better than anyone. The cruiser's light bar erupted in a chaotic strobe of red and blue. Talia let out a slow, controlled breath. She engaged her right turn signal, smoothly pulled over into the parking lot of a closed laundromat, and shifted the car into park. She turned off the engine, switched on the interior dome light, rolled down her window, and placed both hands flat on top of the steering wheel. She didn't reach for her purse. She didn't touch the glove compartment. She sat perfectly still. In the rearview mirror, she watched the driver's side door of the patrol car swing open. Officer Harlan Briggs stepped out into the freezing rain. Briggs was a 10-year veteran of the Fairview Police Department, a man who had built his reputation on aggressive collars and a staggering number of minor traffic citations in predominantly minority neighborhoods. He was broad-shouldered, with a tight buzz cut and a perpetual scowl that suggested the world owed him a debt it was refusing to pay. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Officer Caleb Flynn, a rookie barely 6 months out of the academy, who watched nervously through the rain-streaked windshield. Briggs took his time approaching. He unhooked the heavy flashlight from his duty belt, tapping it rhythmically against his thigh as he walked. When he reached Talia's window, he didn't lean in. Instead, he shined the blinding beam of the mag light directly into her eyes. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Briggs demanded, his voice a flat, authoritative bark that offered no courtesy. Talia squinted, turning her head slightly to avoid the center of the beam. "Good evening, officer. My license is in my purse on the passenger seat, and my registration is in the glove box. I'm going to reach for them now. Is that all right?" Briggs scoffed, a short, ugly sound. He lowered the flashlight just an inch, illuminating her face clearly. "Just get the documents, and no sudden movements." Talia moved deliberately. She retrieved her wallet, extracted her driver's license, then leaned over to pop the glove compartment and handed over the requested paperwork. Briggs snatched the cards from her fingers, intentionally grazing her knuckles with a rough, calloused hand. He spent an overly long time scrutinizing the plastic card, his jaw working as he chewed a piece of gum. "Talia Reed," he read aloud, drawing out the syllables as if they tasted bitter. "You're a long way from home, Talia. What are you doing driving around this neighborhood at this hour?" "I was at a diner studying. I'm on my way home to the north side," Talia replied, her voice steady, modulated, and polite. She knew the law. She knew her rights. But more importantly, she knew the fragile ego of the man standing outside her window. "Studying," Briggs repeated, a smirk playing on his lips. "Right, the diner. You sure you weren't picking something up? Southside is a known drug corridor. You look a little nervous, Talia. Your eyes are bloodshot." "I've been reading textbooks for hours, officer," Talia said, her tone remaining completely neutral. "I am perfectly sober. Could you tell me why I was pulled over?" Briggs' eyes narrowed. The fact that she wasn't stammering, that she wasn't groveling, irritated him. He was used to fear. He thrived on it. "You swerved over the yellow line back on 4th and Elm. Failure to maintain a lane. That gives me probable cause to pull you over. Now step out of the vehicle." Talia froze. She knew exactly where 4th and Elm was. It was a one-way street. There was no yellow line. "Officer, I believe you might be mistaken. 4th Street is a one-way road, and I haven't swerved." "Are you calling me a liar, girl?" Briggs snapped, his hand dropping to rest heavily on the butt of his sidearm. It was an intimidation tactic, plain and simple. "I said, step out of the vehicle. Now!" Talia's heart hammered against her ribs, but her legal training and her father's endless coaching kicked in. "Officer, I am complying with your orders. I am stepping out." She opened the door slowly and stepped into the freezing rain. The cold immediately bit through her thin college sweatshirt. Briggs grabbed her left arm, his grip unnecessarily brutal, yanking her away from the door and spinning her around to press her chest against the cold, wet metal of her car's roof. "Spread your legs," he barked. "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my person or my vehicle," Talia stated clearly, loud enough for the dash cam in his cruiser to pick up the audio. "I am not a threat, and I am unarmed." "I decide who's a threat," Briggs hissed, his hot breath smelling of stale coffee and tobacco against her neck. He kicked her ankles apart, causing her to stumble forward slightly. He aggressively patted down her sides, his hands lingering just a second too long near her hips. Finding nothing, he clicked his tongue in frustration. "You got a smart mouth on you. Law student, huh? Think you know the streets better than I do?" "I know the 4th Amendment," Talia replied, her cheek pressed against the wet roof of her car. That was the tipping point. The fragile glass of Briggs's ego shattered. He unclipped his handcuffs. "You're under arrest," he growled, grabbing her wrists and wrenching them violently behind her back. The metal cuffs ratcheted tightly, biting painfully into her skin. "On what charge?" Talia demanded, the first hint of anger finally bleeding into her voice. "Resisting arrest, failure to comply, and disorderly conduct," Briggs said, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. "Let's see how much that smart mouth helps you in holding." The ride to the 4th Precinct was suffocating. Talia was wedged into the hard plastic back seat of the cruiser, her shoulders aching from the tight handcuffs. The rain battered against the windows, blurring the neon lights of the city into a smear of colors. In the front seat, Briggs was putting on a show for his rookie partner. "See, Flynn, this is what you gotta watch out for. These entitled types. They read a book or two, watch some TV shows, and think they can tell us how to do our jobs. You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. You got to establish dominance early." Flynn, looking pale and deeply uncomfortable in the glow of the dashboard computer, just offered a non-committal grunt. He had seen the stop. He knew Talia hadn't swerved. He knew the arrest was garbage, but Briggs was his training officer, a man who could make or break his probationary period with a single stroke of a pen. Flynn stared out the window, choosing silence over integrity. Talia remained absolutely silent in the back. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply cataloged everything. The details of the stop, the badge number she had memorized off his chest, badge 4492, the exact phrasing of his threats. She knew that any reaction would be used to justify his fabricated disorderly conduct charge. The cruiser pulled into the sallyport of the 4th Precinct. The heavy concrete walls seemed to swallow them whole as the steel doors rolled shut behind them. Briggs dragged her out of the car by her bicep, marching her through the heavy double doors into the booking area. The precinct smelled of floor wax, stale sweat, and cheap industrial coffee. It was the dead zone of the graveyard shift. A few officers were slumped at their desks, typing out reports with 2 fingers. Behind the elevated booking desk sat Sergeant Elias Crow. Crow was a 20-year veteran, counting down the days until his pension kicked in. He was a decent man but worn down by the system, often turning a blind eye to the aggressive tactics of the patrolmen just to keep the peace in the house. "What do we have, Briggs?" Crow asked, rubbing his tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Got a live one tonight, Sarge," Briggs boasted, shoving Talia forward so she stumbled against the booking counter. Talia Reed, traffic violation turned into resisting and failure to comply. Suspect she might be under the influence of narcotics, given her erratic behavior. Crow looked down at Talia. He saw a young, impeccably dressed black woman with terrified but defiant eyes, soaking wet, shivering from the cold. He looked at the arrest report Briggs slammed onto the counter. "Any contraband found on her person?" Crow asked. "No," Briggs admitted, his jaw tightening. but she was combative, verbally hostile. Crow sighed. He hated these kinds of callers. Contempt of cop. It meant paperwork, and it rarely held up in front of a judge. But he wasn't going to undermine a senior officer in front of the precinct. All right. Empty her pockets, take her jewelry, put her in holding cell 3. As an older female officer came over to process Talia's belongings, Talia finally spoke. "I am requesting my phone call, Sergeant." Briggs laughed. "You'll get your call when we're good and ready, sweetie." "Actually," Crow interjected, his tone mild but firm, checking Briggs's ego just a fraction. "Booking protocol says she gets a call once she's processed. Let her use the wall phone." Briggs glared at the sergeant but backed off. Talia was uncuffed, her fingers numb and tingling. She walked over to the heavy metal payphone bolted to the cinder block wall. She didn't need to look up the number. She had known it by heart since she was 7 years old. She picked up the receiver and dialed. The phone rang twice. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was deep, gravelly from sleep, but instantly alert. "Dad," Talia said, keeping her voice incredibly low, her back turned to the booking desk where Briggs was loudly bragging to another cop about how he handled the situation. "It's Talia." "Talia, are you okay? Did you have an accident?" The concern in his voice was palpable. "I'm fine. I'm physically fine, but I've been arrested." There was a dead, heavy silence on the line for 3 agonizing seconds. When the voice returned, the warmth of a concerned father had vanished, replaced by the chilling, precise tone of a seasoned commander. "Where are you?" "The 4th Precinct, South Side." "What are the charges?" "Traffic violation, resisting, failure to comply." "It's a bad stop, Dad. Completely fabricated. The officer's name is Briggs." Another pause. "Briggs? I know him." "Did he hurt you, Talia?" "Just the cuffs. They were tight. I didn't say anything, Dad. I didn't drop your name. I just let him do it." "Good girl," the voice said, soft but vibrating with an intensity that would have terrified anyone who knew the man. "You did exactly right. Do not speak to anyone. Do not answer any questions. I am leaving the house now. I will be there soon." "Okay, Dad." Talia hung up the phone. She turned around. Briggs was leaning against the counter, a smug grin plastered across his face. "Who'd you call? Mommy? Your little lawyer boyfriend?" Briggs mocked. "Tell them to bring bail money. You're gonna be in that cage for a while." Talia looked at Officer Harlan Briggs. She looked at his arrogant stance, the dirt on his boots, the shiny badge pinned to his chest. She felt a profound sense of pity for the man, not out of kindness, but out of the absolute certainty of his impending doom. "Just a family member," Talia said quietly as the female officer escorted her toward the iron bars of holding cell 3. The heavy door clanged shut, the mechanical lock echoing loudly in the damp room. She sat down on the metal bench, crossed her legs, and waited for the storm to hit. Darius Reed did not panic. Panic was a luxury for people who didn't know how to dismantle a bomb. And Darius had spent his entire adult life dismantling explosive situations. He rose from his bed in the sprawling, quiet house in the affluent North Side suburbs. He didn't wake his wife. She was recovering from a mild flu, and there was no need to cause her undue stress. He walked into his walk-in closet and dressed methodically. He bypassed his tailored suits and his crisp, decorated uniform. Tonight, he was not putting on a show for the press. Tonight, it was personal. He pulled on a dark gray turtleneck, a heavy black wool trench coat, and a pair of dark leather gloves. He walked to the safe in his study, dialed the combination, and retrieved his off-duty piece, a compact Glock 19, sliding it into his shoulder holster. He didn't grab his badge case. He slipped the golden shield directly into his coat pocket. Darius Reed was the chief of police for the city of Fairview. He was the first black man to hold the position in the city's 150-year history. He had earned the spot not through politics, but through 30 years of grinding, brilliant police work. He had started as a beat cop in the South Side, worked his way through homicide, commanded the narcotics division, and eventually cleaned out the corruption in the upper brass to claim the top spot. He was respected by the mayor, feared by the gangs, and revered by the good cops. But he knew the 4th Precinct. He knew the culture there. It was a holdover from a bygone era. A boys' club where old-school cops thought a badge was a license to enforce their own personal prejudices. He had been slowly transferring the worst offenders out, tightening policies and demanding accountability. but clearly the message hadn't reached Officer Harlan Briggs. Darius stepped out into the freezing rain and climbed into his personal vehicle, a jet-black, unmarked Ford Expedition. He didn't use lights or sirens. He drove the speed limit, his mind operating with the cold precision of a supercomputer. He mentally reviewed everything he knew about Harlan Briggs, excessive force complaints, disciplinary hearings that had miraculously resulted in slaps on the wrist thanks to a strong union rep, a pattern of racially biased traffic stops that the Internal Affairs Division was currently quietly building a federal case on. Briggs had just handed the chief the final nail for his own coffin, and he had used the chief's own flesh and blood to do it. A short time later, the Ford Expedition pulled into the visitor parking lot of the 4th Precinct. Inside the station, the late-night lull had fully settled in. Sergeant Crow was reading a paperback novel behind the desk. Officer Flynn was sitting at a corner desk, nervously writing and rewriting his incident report, trying to figure out how to make Briggs's lies sound plausible on paper. Briggs himself was sitting in the break area adjacent to the booking desk, his boots propped up on a plastic table. He was eating a powdered donut and holding a cup of coffee, holding court with 2 other patrolmen. "I'm telling you," Briggs laughed loudly, powder dusting his uniform chin. "She tried to hit me with the whole 'I know my rights, I'm in law school' routine. I shot that down real quick, tossed her in the back. These kids today, they need to learn respect. Sometimes you just got to put the fear of God in them to remind them who runs the streets." The heavy double doors of the precinct lobby hissed open. A gust of freezing, rain-soaked air swept through the room, causing the loose papers on the bulletin board to flutter wildly. Footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor, slow, heavy, deliberate. Sergeant Crow looked up from his book, annoyed by the draft. He saw a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black trench coat walking toward the booking desk. The man's face was shadowed, his posture rigidly straight. "Can I help you, sir?" Crow asked, his tone carrying the bored authority of a desk sergeant dealing with a late-night civilian. "If you're here to post bail, you'll have to wait until the magistrate arrives later." The man stopped directly in front of the elevated desk. He didn't look at Crow. His eyes, cold and dark as obsidian, were locked onto the break area, locked onto Harlan Briggs, who was in the middle of taking a bite of his donut. Briggs paused, feeling the weight of the stare. He lowered his donut, his brow furrowing. "Can I help you, buddy? The sergeant just told you bail is closed." The man in the trench coat slowly reached into his pocket. Crow tensed, his hand instinctively dropping toward the sidearm holstered on his hip. But the man didn't pull a weapon. He pulled a heavy, solid gold badge. He didn't flash it. He simply set it down on the wooden surface of the booking desk with a heavy metallic clack. 4 stars. Crow's breath hitched in his throat. The blood drained from his face so fast he felt dizzy. He scrambled to his feet, his chair rolling backward and slamming loudly into the wall. "10 Hut!" Crow shouted, his voice cracking with sheer panic. Every officer in the room froze. Flynn dropped his pen. The 2 cops sitting with Briggs jumped up so fast one of them spilled coffee all over his trousers. Briggs lowered his feet from the table, confusion warring with a sudden icy dread in his gut. He stood up slowly, wiping the powdered sugar from his mouth. Chief Darius Reed finally looked at Sergeant Crow. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the dead, silent room. "Sergeant Crow, I want the arrest report, the dash cam footage and the body cam footage for the suspect brought in earlier. Now." Crow's hands were shaking as he fumbled with the paperwork on his desk. "Chief Reed." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Briggs felt his knees go weak. Reed. The name echoed in his skull like a gunshot. He looked back toward the holding cells, then back to the towering figure in the black coat, the young woman in the cell, Talia Reed. "Chief!" Briggs stammered, stepping forward, his bravado entirely evaporated, replaced by the desperate, scrambling tone of a cornered rat. "Chief, I can explain. It was a chaotic scene. The suspect was non-compliant." Darius Reed turned his head. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just looked at Briggs. It was a look that had broken hardened cartel hitmen in interrogation rooms. "Officer Briggs," the chief said, his voice dropping another octave. "If you speak another word in my presence before Internal Affairs arrives, I will personally throw you through that plate glass window." Briggs snapped his mouth shut, his face turning an ashen gray. The donut he had just eaten felt like lead in his stomach. "Sergeant," the chief commanded, not breaking eye contact with Briggs. "Unlock cell 3. Bring my daughter to me." Sergeant Elias Crow's hands shook so violently that the large brass ring of jail keys clattered like a dropped tambourine. He practically jogged toward the holding area, his breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. Every officer in the booking room remained frozen in a state of suspended animation, their eyes darting between the towering, motionless figure of Chief Darius Reed and the pale, sweating face of Officer Harlan Briggs. The heavy mechanical clunk of the deadbolt echoing from the holding corridor sounded like a cannon shot in the silent precinct. Crow swung the iron door of holding cell 3 open wide. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice trembling, stripped of all its former bureaucratic boredom, You are released. Please step out." Talia Reed stood up from the metal bench. She smoothed out the wrinkles in her damp Georgetown law sweatshirt, maintained a perfectly neutral expression, and walked out of the cell. She didn't look at Sergeant Crow. She walked straight through the corridor and emerged into the main booking area. When Darius Reed saw his daughter, the rigid, icy exterior of the police chief fractured for exactly 1 second. His broad shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, and a muscle in his jaw feathered as he took in her damp clothes and the angry red welts visible on her wrists where the cuffs had bitten into her skin. He took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between them, and wrapped his arms around her. "Are you hurt?" he whispered into her ear, his voice tight. "I'm okay, Dad," Talia murmured back, leaning into his embrace for a brief moment before pulling away, recognizing the tactical environment they were in. "I documented everything mentally. Timestamps, badge numbers, phrasing." "I know you did," Darius said, pride swelling in his chest, quickly replaced by a cold, calculating fury as he turned his attention back to the room. The chief of police was back online. Darius turned to the desk sergeant, who was practically sweating through his uniform shirt. "Sergeant Crow, I want the desk log secured. I want Officer Briggs and Officer Flynn's body cameras detached and handed to me right now. Furthermore, I want the patrol vehicle, Unit 42, locked down in the Sally port. Nobody touches the dash cam server." Briggs, standing by the break room table, felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. He knew standard protocol for a contested arrest, but this wasn't protocol. This was an executive strike. He watched, horrified, as his rookie partner, Caleb Flynn, moved with astonishing speed. Flynn unclipped the Axon body camera from the center of his chest, walked directly up to the chief, and handed it over. "Sir, my camera. It was active during the entire interaction." "Flynn, what the hell are you doing?" Briggs hissed, taking a step forward. "That's Union property until a formal rep is present." Chief Reed slowly turned his gaze to Briggs. "Officer Briggs, you are currently under investigation for false arrest, excessive force, and falsifying a police report. If you attempt to obstruct the collection of evidence, I will personally add tampering with evidence and insubordination to your charges, and I will have Sergeant Crow place you in the very cell you just pulled my daughter out of. Detach the camera." Briggs swallowed hard. The absolute certainty in the chief's voice paralyzed him. With trembling fingers, he unclipped his own camera and set it on the booking desk. "Now," Reed commanded, his voice echoing off the cinder block walls, "I want Captain Victor Lang from Internal Affairs on the phone. Wake him up. Tell him to get a strike team down here immediately. And, Sergeant, confiscate Officer Briggs's duty weapon and his badge. He is officially stripped of his police powers pending investigation." A collective gasp sucked the remaining air out of the room. A summary suspension on the spot was practically unheard of. It bypassed the Union, bypassed the precinct commander, and went straight to the nuclear option. "You can't do this," Briggs protested, his voice cracking as panic finally overwhelmed his ego. "I have rights. I want my PBA representative. I followed procedure. She was swerving. She was uncooperative." "Save it for IA Harlan," a new voice interrupted. From the corner of the room, Officer Caleb Flynn finally found his spine. The young rookie who had spent the last 6 months silently enduring Briggs's toxic bravado and aggressive tactics stepped forward. His face was pale, but his voice was remarkably steady. "She wasn't swerving, Chief," Flynn said, looking directly at Darius Reed. "Shut your mouth, rookie," Briggs roared, lunging a half step forward before freezing under the chief's lethal glare. Flynn ignored his training officer. He looked at Talia, offering a subtle nod of apology, then looked back at the chief. "We were tailing her for 4 blocks. She was driving perfectly." Officer Briggs stated he wanted to, quote, "see what this one was doing in our neighborhood." He fabricated the failure to maintain a lane on 4th and Elm. "I knew 4th was a one-way, but I didn't correct him. When she cited the law, he escalated. The arrest was retaliatory, sir, completely punitive." The silence that followed Flynn's confession was absolute. Briggs stared at his partner, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, the betrayal severing his last lifeline. The blue wall of silence, the toxic code that Briggs had relied on for 10 years to protect his worst impulses, had just shattered into a million pieces. "Thank you, Officer Flynn," Chief Reed said, his tone softening just a fraction. "Your honesty has been noted. Please wait in the briefing room. Internal Affairs will need your official statement." As Flynn walked away, Reed picked up Briggs's heavy gold badge from the booking desk where Crow had placed it. He weighed it in his palm, feeling the cold metal before slipping it into his coat pocket next to his own. "Go sit in the interrogation room, Mr. Briggs," Reed said, intentionally dropping the title of officer. "Your night is just beginning." As the investigation unfolded, the 4th Precinct transformed from a sleepy graveyard shift into a high-octane command center. Captain Victor Lang, the head of Internal Affairs, a notoriously ruthless investigator who had built his career on hunting corrupt cops, arrived with 3 of his best detectives. They moved with clinical efficiency, taking over the precinct commander's office and turning it into a makeshift war room. Long, a lean man with prematurely silver hair and sharp analytical eyes, immediately plugged the confiscated Axon body cameras into his encrypted laptop. Chief Reed sat silently in the corner of the office, his arms crossed, watching the monitors. Talia sat beside him, wrapped in a dry police blanket someone had miraculously found, sipping a cup of hot tea. "All right, let's see what we have," Lang muttered, clicking the play button on Briggs's footage. The high-definition video filled the screen. The sound of the freezing rain was instantly audible. The camera showed Briggs's aggressive approach, the blinding flashlight shoved directly into Talia's face, and his immediately hostile tone. Talia watched herself on the screen. She heard her own calm, measured voice. She heard Briggs's escalating agitation, the fabricated claim about the yellow line on 4th and Elm, and the unmistakable sound of his hand slapping his holster for intimidation. "He's trying to provoke a 148, Lang noted quietly, referencing the penal code for resisting an officer. "Textbook escalation. He wants her to snap so he has a legitimate reason to put hands on her." The video showed Talia stepping out of the car. Then the footage jerked violently as Briggs grabbed her. The audio picked up the sickening thud of her chest hitting the wet roof of the Honda. Darius Reed's jaw clenched so tightly the muscles looked like they might snap. He stared at the screen, watching a man assault his daughter under the color of authority. It took every ounce of his 30 years of discipline not to walk down the hall to the interrogation room and handle things the old-fashioned way. "Stop the video," Reed ordered quietly. Long hit the space bar. The image froze on a frame of Talia's face pressed against the car roof, her expression one of pained endurance. "We have excessive force, false arrest, and a clear violation of the 4th Amendment," Lang stated, typing furiously on a separate notepad. "But Briggs is a rat. He's going to claim he smelled marijuana or that he perceived a furtive movement. He's going to try and muddy the waters." His union rep, Brendan Doyle, is in the lobby right now, and Doyle is a bulldog. Reed shook his head slightly. "Briggs is arrogant, Victor. Arrogant men get sloppy when they panic. When I first walked in, he was at the break table. I want to see the precinct security footage from around the time of the booking. I want to know exactly what he was doing before I walked through those doors." Long nodded to one of his detectives, who immediately pulled up the CCTV feed from the booking room. They fast-forwarded to the moment Briggs brought Talia in. They watched the booking process, and then they watched Briggs retreat to the break area with his 2 buddies. "Zoom in on Briggs," Reed instructed. The detective enhanced the feed. Briggs was laughing, eating his donut. But then, for a brief window, he pulled his personal cell phone out of his pocket. He hunched over, shielding the screen with his hand, and typed a rapid message before slipping the phone away. "He sent a text," Lang observed, his eyes narrowing. "Who is he texting after a contested arrest?" Reed's mind raced. He knows Flynn is a liability. He knows the arrest report is flimsy. If he's smart, and he's cunning, if nothing else, he knows the only thing that can undeniably sink him is the dash cam footage from Unit 42. The body cam he can try to explain away as a scuffle, but the dash cam shows the driving. It proves the initial stop was a complete fabrication. I was texting dispatch, Lang realized, the pieces clicking together. The IT servers for the cruisers are housed in the downtown hub. He's got a buddy in dispatch who owes him a favor. He was trying to get the footage corrupted or wiped. Long grabbed his radio. IA Team 2, this is Lang. I need a seizure warrant for Harlan Briggs's personal cell phone right now. And get a team over to the central dispatch server room. Lock down all data for Unit 42. Soon after, the door to the office opened, and a detective walked in holding a sealed evidence bag containing Briggs's iPhone. He tried to smash it when we walked into the interrogation room, Captain, but we got it before he could crack the motherboard. IT is pulling the logs now. Later, Brendan Doyle, the formidable union representative for the Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, pushed his way into the commander's office. Doyle was a big, red-faced man who made a living defending the indefensible. Chief Reed, Captain Lang, Doyle barked, leaning heavily on the desk. This is a gross violation of due process. You stripped a decorated veteran of his badge on hearsay from a rookie, and you locked him in a box. I want my client reinstated, and I want him released, or I will have the mayor's office burying you in injunctions by morning. Reed didn't stand up. He simply slid a printed piece of paper across the desk toward the union rep. Read it, Brendan, Reed said softly. Doyle scowled, picking up the paper. It was a printed transcript of a text message extracted from Briggs's phone, sent to a dispatcher named Derek Holt. Derek, need a huge favor. Unit 42 dash cam from earlier. A glitch happened, right? Corrupted file. I owe you big time. Delete it before morning shift. Doyle's red face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. The bluster instantly vanished from his posture. A bad arrest could be defended in arbitration. Excessive force could be debated in front of a sympathetic civil service board. But conspiracy to destroy digital evidence, soliciting another city employee to commit a felony cover-up, that was a federal crime. That was the end of the line. Furthermore, Captain Lang added, leaning back in his chair, Officer Flynn has just signed a sworn affidavit stating that Briggs fabricated the probable cause for the traffic stop explicitly to harass a civilian. We have the body cam footage showing unprovoked physical assault. And as you may have noticed, the victim in this case is the daughter of the chief of police. Doyle slowly placed the paper back onto the desk. He looked at Darius Reed, then at Talia, who was watching him with cool, calculating eyes. Doyle was a fighter, but he wasn't a fool. He knew a bloodbath when he saw one. Briggs hadn't just stepped on a landmine. He had jumped on a grenade and pulled the pin himself. I see, Doyle said, clearing his throat awkwardly. He took a step back from the desk, physically distancing himself from his client's sinking ship. The PBA cannot and will not condone the destruction of evidence. Officer Briggs is on his own regarding the felony tampering charges. Glad we agree, Brendan, Reed said, finally standing up. He buttoned his black trench coat. I want Briggs's formal resignation on my desk. If he resigns, I will let the district attorney handle the criminal charges regarding the assault and the tampering. If he refuses to resign, I will publicly fire him at a press conference. I will release the body cam footage to every news outlet in the state, and I will personally lobby the U.S. attorney to charge him with federal civil rights violations under Section 1983. Reed leaned forward, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. He will never wear a badge again. Not in this city, not in this state, not anywhere. Go tell your client what time it is, Brendan. Doyle nodded quickly, turning on his heel and fleeing the room. The Union machinery had officially abandoned Harlan Briggs. The predator had become the prey, dismantled with ruthless, bureaucratic precision before the sun had even fully risen. The interrogation room deep inside the 4th Precinct was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to break the human spirit. The walls were painted a dull, institutional gray, and the air conditioning was permanently cranked to a freezing 60 degrees. For hours, Harlan Briggs had been left alone in that room. He had paced the floor, his heavy boots scuffing the linoleum. He had cursed. He had kicked the metal table leg, and finally, he had collapsed into the rigid metal chair, staring at the one-way mirror. He knew exactly how this game was played. He had used these exact tactics on hundreds of suspects. The isolation was meant to let the panic steep like a bitter tea. Finally, the heavy steel door unlocked with a loud mechanical clank. Chief Darius Reed walked in first, followed closely by Captain Victor Lang. Neither man carried a notepad. Neither man offered Briggs a cup of water or a cigarette. They didn't sit down. They simply stood on the opposite side of the steel table, looking down at the man who had terrorized the South Side for a decade. "Where is Doyle?" Briggs demanded, his voice raspy, trying to project a defiance he no longer felt. "I know my rights. I don't say a damn word until my PBA rep is sitting in that chair." "Brendan Doyle went home to his wife, Harlan," Lang said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "He took one look at the evidence and decided the union doesn't cover federal obstruction and evidence tampering. You're flying solo tonight." Briggs scoffed, though his eyes darted nervously toward the door. "Bluffing. The PBA doesn't abandon a senior officer over a scuffle with a combative suspect. You've got a rookie's word against a decorated veteran. Good luck selling that to a grand jury." Chief Reed reached into his trench coat pocket. He didn't pull out the badge he had confiscated. Instead, he pulled out a single sheet of paper, the printed transcript of the text message. He slid it across the cold metal table. It came to a stop directly under Briggs's nose. "Derek Holt in dispatch sends his regards," Reed said quietly. "IT intercepted the deletion request. They locked the server. The dash cam footage of my daughter driving perfectly for 4 blocks is secured in an encrypted internal affairs vault. The body cam footage of you assaulting her is secured. And now we have your written attempt to solicit a city employee to destroy evidence of a civil rights violation." Briggs stared at the paper. The words blurred together. The blood roared in his ears. A deafening waterfall of absolute catastrophe. The text message was the kill shot. There was no spinning this. There was no "feared for my life" defense. It was premeditated, documented corruption. He looked up at Darius Reed. The chief's face was a mask of carved granite showing zero mercy. 20 years in a federal penitentiary," Lang stated, checking his watch as if the matter were already concluded. "That's the mandatory minimum we will seek when we hand this over to the FBI Public Corruption Squad. A cop like you, Harlan, you won't last 2 years in general population." Briggs' breath began to come in short, hyperventilating gasps. The bravado shattered completely, leaving behind a terrified, desperate man clinging to the edge of a cliff. His mind raced frantically, searching for any leverage, any piece of collateral he could use to bargain for his life. "Wait," Briggs croaked, his hands trembling so violently he had to press them flat against the table. "Wait, you want to talk about corruption? You think I'm the only one? You think Derek Holt wiped server files out of the goodness of his heart?" Reed and Lang exchanged a micro glance. This was the crack in the dam they had been waiting for. "Keep talking," Reed commanded. Briggs leaned forward, his eyes wide and bloodshot, sweat dripping from his brow. "If I go down for this, I'm not going down alone. You want to clean up the 4th Precinct, Chief? You think I'm the problem? I'm just a collector. I'm a foot soldier." "A collector for what?" Lang asked, stepping closer to the table. "The South Side Initiative," Briggs sneered, spitting the words out like poison. "That's what they call it. You think the minor traffic citations, the civil asset forfeitures, the cash seized from suspected drug dealers that never makes it to the evidence locker, you think that just disappears? It goes into a slush fund. Holt gets a cut to wipe the digital trails. The patrolmen get a cut for making the stops. And the lion's share goes straight to the top of this precinct." Reed felt a cold spike of adrenaline. He had suspected deep-rooted issues in the 4th, but a coordinated systemic extortion ring was beyond his worst fears. "Give me a name, Briggs, right now." "Captain Garrett Sloan," Briggs said, dropping the name of the 4th Precinct's commanding officer. "Sloan runs the whole show. He targets undocumented immigrants, out-of-towners, and anyone who doesn't have the money to fight a bogus charge in court. I targeted your daughter tonight because she was young, black, and driving a beat-up Honda in the South Side at that hour. She fit the profile of a perfect victim, someone we could shake down, intimidate, and process without making waves. I didn't know who she was, but Sloan, he designed the whole system." Sorry." The interrogation room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Briggs had just offered up a king to save a pawn. "Where is the proof?" Lang demanded, his investigator's mind already moving 3 steps ahead. The word of a disgraced cop facing 20 years isn't enough to take down a precinct captain. Briggs offered a grim, ugly smile. Sloan is old school, but he's greedy. He doesn't trust digital ledgers. He keeps a physical burn book, a little black moleskin notebook. He keeps it in the false bottom of the lowest drawer in his office desk. It has every payout, every wiped file, every fake arrest for the last 4 years. You want the head of the snake, Chief? It's sitting in the commander's office right now. Reed didn't hesitate. He turned on his heel and walked out of the interrogation room. Lang followed, leaving Briggs alone with his treacherous confession. They walked briskly down the hall to the precinct's war room, where Talia was still sitting, watching the rain finally begin to taper off through the barred windows. "Did you get him?" Talia asked, seeing the dark intensity in her father's eyes. "We got a lot more than him," Reed replied. He looked at Lang. "Get a search warrant for Captain Sloan's office desk immediately. Wake up Judge Harper. Tell her it's a matter of departmental integrity. I want that desk torn apart before Sloan arrives for his morning shift." Long nodded, already pulling out his encrypted cell phone. "And Briggs?" "Briggs just bought himself out of federal lockup, but he's still going to state prison," Reed said coldly. "Prepare the resignation paperwork, but I want Sloan in handcuffs before the sun clears the horizon." As the first rays of morning light broke through the heavy cloud cover, casting a pale, bruised glow over the city of Fairview inside the 4th Precinct, the atmosphere was electric with suppressed tension. The night shift officers were kept on lockdown, unable to leave, while heavily armed internal affairs detectives stood guard at the doors. In Captain Garrett Sloan's office, Lang and his team were meticulously dismantling the heavy oak desk. Armed with the emergency warrant signed by a furious municipal judge just minutes prior, they pulled out the bottom drawer. Lang took a crowbar to the wooden base. With a sharp crack, the false bottom splintered, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside sat a small black moleskin notebook, exactly as Briggs had described. Long flipped through the pages. It was a masterpiece of arrogance. Sloan had meticulously logged dates, badge numbers, amounts of seized cash, and payouts to dispatchers. It was an airtight, undeniable map of a criminal enterprise operating under the banner of the Fairview Police Department. "Checkmate," Lang whispered. Soon after, the front doors of the precinct swung open. Captain Garrett Sloan, a boisterous, silver-haired man who had treated the South Side like his personal fiefdom for 5 years, walked into his lobby. He was holding a large coffee from a local bakery, completely oblivious to the massacre that had occurred in his house overnight. "Morning, Sergeant," Sloan boomed toward the booking desk, expecting the usual chorus of respectful greetings. Instead of a greeting, Sloan was met by the sight of Chief Darius Reed standing in the center of the room. Behind him stood Captain Lang, holding the black moleskin notebook in a plastic evidence bag. To Sloan's right, 4 IA detectives stepped out of the shadows, their hands resting on their duty weapons. Sloan froze, his eyes locked onto the black notebook. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, hitting the linoleum floor and splashing brown liquid across his polished shoes. "Captain Garrett Sloan," Lang announced, his voice ringing out with absolute authority. "You are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and corruption of public officials. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Sloan didn't fight. He didn't argue. He knew the notebook was a death sentence. The color drained from his face as the detectives moved in, ratcheting the steel handcuffs around the wrists of the precinct commander. As Sloan was frog-marched out of his own lobby, the remaining night shift officers watched in stunned, terrified silence. The untouchable regime of the 4th Precinct had been decapitated in a matter of seconds. Back in the interrogation room, Lang placed a single piece of paper in front of Harlan Briggs along with a cheap plastic pen. "This is your official resignation from the Fairview Police Department, effective immediately," Lang said. "Sign it, and I will recommend that the district attorney drop the federal civil rights charges in exchange for your testimony against Sloan. You'll plead guilty to state-level evidence tampering and assault. You're still doing time, Harlan, but you get to do it in a state facility instead of a federal pen." Briggs picked up the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely form the letters. He scrawled his signature across the bottom line, officially ending his 10-year career of bullying, intimidation, and corruption. "Stand up," Reed ordered from the doorway. Briggs stood, his shoulders slumped, a hollow, defeated shell of the man who had pulled Talia over just hours earlier. "Turn in your ID card, your precinct keys, and your PBA card," Reed demanded. Briggs numbly emptied his pockets on the table. "You are a disgrace to that uniform," Reed said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "You used the authority vested in you to terrorize the very people you swore to protect. You thought the badge made you a god in the dark. But the light always comes, Harlan, and in the light, you are nothing." Reed turned and walked out of the room, leaving Briggs to the custody of the IA detectives. Later that morning, the precinct doors opened one final time. Talia Reed walked out into the crisp, cold morning air. The rain had completely stopped, washing the streets clean. The gray clouds were breaking apart, allowing bright golden shafts of sunlight to hit the pavement. Darius Reed walked beside her. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline of the night finally beginning to recede, leaving behind the heavy weight of leadership. But as he looked at his daughter, his posture straightened. "Are you all right, Talia?" he asked, opening the passenger door of the Ford Expedition for her. Talia paused, looking back at the brutalist concrete architecture of the 4th Precinct. She thought about the terror she had felt on that dark highway. She thought about the handcuffs biting into her wrists. But then she thought about the black notebook. She thought about Captain Sloan in handcuffs and Briggs signing away his power. "I am," Talia said softly, a fierce, resilient spark lighting up her eyes. "He thought I was just a victim, Dad. He thought I was just another number he could push around in the dark. He didn't realize he pulled over the one person who could tear his whole world down." Darius smiled, a rare, genuine expression of immense pride. "No, sweetheart, he didn't." They climbed into the SUV. As Darius started the engine, he reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the heavy gold badge bearing the number 4492. He looked at it for a long moment. A badge that had been used as a shield for monsters. A badge that no longer held any power. He tossed it carelessly into the center console, shifted the truck into drive, and pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward the north side and home. Behind them, the Fairview Police Department was irrevocably changed, purged of its darkest rot. All because one arrogant cop picked the wrong woman on a rainy night. If this thrilling tale of justice, corruption, and the ultimate takedown kept you on the edge of your seat, we need your support to bring more incredible stories to life. Hit that like button to show your love. Share this gripping story with your friends and family who love a satisfying twist. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense real-life drama and powerful storytelling. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps us expose the truth and tell the stories that matter.